And now we kind of naturally move towards metta, which is kind of just a continuation on the other side of the same spectrum, if you like, the same kind of continuum. And so it's still really working with the idea of right effort, how to give rise to the right kind of mind states that are conducive to the practice. And the next sutta is called the Kosambhya Sutta from the Majjhima Nikaya again. It's actually quite one of those nice suttas, and it has one little part there on how the monks are supposed to live together in a way that creates harmony and unity, and they can live together on friendly terms. Because there was a dispute, I think, in the Sangha, and then the Buddha gives this teaching on how to live in harmony together. And it gives you the kind of the foundation for the practice of metta, of loving kindness, friendliness, and this sort of thing. And that's actually interesting in its own right, the word metta, what it is derived, how it is derived, where it comes from. Usually translated as loving kindness in English. And I guess that's okay, that's not really problematic. But the word metta is just derived from the word mitta. The mitta is like a kalyana mitta, which means friend, and metta is then derived from that. It means basically friendliness, and then but friendliness in a kind of very positive sense. So friendliness, goodwill, loving kindness, all of these things are valid translations of this particular word. So this then is how this sutta goes. It's only an extract as usual, because a lot of this is not really relevant for what we're doing now, but this is the extract from the sutta. The Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus. Bhikkhus, there are these 6 principles of cordiality that create love and respect and conduce to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, or if you like, harmony, and to unity. What are these 6? Here, a bhikkhu maintains acts of loving kindness, both in public and in private, towards his companions in the holy life. This is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect, conduces to cohesion, non-dispute, concord, and to unity. So this is the beginning here of metta. Metta doesn't really start off with sitting down and spreading metta to everyone and the whole world. It starts off with how we deal with people in ordinary life, that we actually treat them in the correct way by body, and of course next we see coming up here is speech. And this is, I think, an important principle. It's not that it shouldn't be too abstract. It shouldn't be just something that we do when we do our meditation practice. Our whole life should be an expression of these good qualities of friendliness, kindness, goodwill, and all of these things. And we have to start off in the easier places. It's quite hard to sit down and wish the whole world well, right, and feel really good about that. Very few people are actually able to do that properly. So we have to start off where it's easy, and that is just wishing people well through how we speak with them and how we deal with them on a day-to-day basis. That is where it all starts off. And it's interesting, sometimes I have noticed myself when I speak to some of those very well-known monks who often have a lot of kind of metta qualities. I've noticed how down-to-earth they are. When you ask them about this, how to practice metta, they usually say, you're just nice to everyone. They don't say anything about sitting down and spreading metta to the whole world. Be kind to people. That's what they say, basically. And last year, I went to visit a monk in Thailand, a very famous monk called Ajahn. He has been to a monastery here a few times before. He was here for a full year. He's got a very close connection to Ajahn Brahm. And I went to his monastery, and when you go to his monastery, you kind of sit down in his presence, and all of these other people sit there. And he doesn't say very much. He just sits on this big seat. He's a tiny little monk, but he sits on this enormous seat. Everybody's sitting in front of him. He doesn't say very much, but people still just hanging around, right? Because it's so nice to hang around a monk like that. You don't need to say anything. You just kind of feel the vibe, and that's good enough. And then occasionally he might say a few words, right? And nothing much happens. But people are very, very happy in his presence, right? And very relaxed and very nice. And then next to him, he has this large bowl of sweets. I told this before, I think. Enormous bowl of sweets, this really, really massive one. And you get these monks with buckets filling it up all the time with sweets. He has this store of sweets in his large cutie. And then he has a little dipper that he dips into this massive bowl. And he takes this one and he throws them out onto the people. They're kind of raining sweets on you. And it's kind of nice because a sweet obviously is sweet in its own right, but then it's almost as if it's filled with metta at the same time because it has so much loving kindness. And you get this kind of nice thing. So it sounds a bit wacky, but when you're there, it's actually very nice. It's very kind of friendly and beautiful. Then I asked him specifically, he gave me a lot of time, right? I said, I'm a disciple of Ajahn Brahmali. Oh yeah, no problem. So we had many hours of chat with him. Everybody else had kind of 2 minutes at the most. I had many hours with him, which was very, very nice. And then I asked him, how do you practice metta? Because he's obviously very famous for that. And what he said, right? He didn't say anything about meditation or anything like that. He said, when you wake up in the morning, you should ask yourself, what can you do for the world today? Yeah, what can you do for the world today? And I thought, wow, that's actually very nice. It's very simple, very practical, very pragmatic, very down to earth. How can I be a blessing for my fellow humanity, if you like, on today? What can I do today to kind of be supportive? And so very simple teachings, and this is what you often find with those people who are very advanced on the path. They give such simple teachings, right? Very basic stuff. Because that is the foundation upon which everything else is built. Sila is where it's at. Morality, our character, these kind of things, and everything else sort of develops from that. So loving kindness in action, very simple, very basic, but very profound. If we can do that all the time, right? It's this ability again to commit yourself to these things and do it continuously. With perseverance, and then that's when these things have tremendous fruit and benefit as a result of that. So you have these acts of loving kindness both in public and in private as well. So you don't kind of when you go out into the world, you kind of want to impress everyone with all the loving kindness, but actually in private you think in the same way, and you have the same kind of attitude in private as you have outside. And then this little interesting phrase here: towards his companions in the holy life. These are the sub-brahmacharis. These are he's talking to the monks here. So this means his fellow monastics. They are the ones that we're supposed to have loving kindness for. Doesn't say anything about the lay people, right? Does that mean that we can do whatever we like to the lay people? What does it mean? And what it means, I think, and this is what I was talking about the other day, is the idea that the loving kindness that matters the most is towards the people who are closest to you. That is where these are the most important people in your life, because they are close to you. It's easy to fault find, it's easy to create problems there. And then if you get disharmony within the monastic community, it makes it impossible to meditate. So that is kind of your testing ground. If you can have loving kindness to the people who are closest to you, then it's much easier to have loving kindness to everyone else. And so monks you see every day, sometimes they get on your nerves. The only exception is Venerable Akaliko. He never gets on my nerves, but but of course, when you are with but this is the reality of things, right? When you see people all the time, sometimes they just, you have had enough of something, and you kind of, and this is just the nature of things. So that is where the real battleground in terms of metta is, the people who are around you all the time, your family members, right? People who you see all the time, that is where it is most difficult. And if you're able to have metta there, it's easy. It's easy for me to have metta to you guys. I see you here once a year at Chana Grove, right? So easy, in very nice circumstances and everything. So easy. So then that happens naturally. It doesn't mean that we can abuse the lay people. That's not what it means at all. It means that it's just so much easier with those people who are a bit further away from you. So very interesting, and this is why people we're talking the other day about the idea of social activism and these kind of things, and that's fine, but don't forget the most important things. These are probably more important than all of that other stuff. So this is number one. So you have the principles of This is one of the principles of cordiality that creates all of these benefits. Love and respect, right? You respect people. You don't respect only those who are more senior than you. You respect everyone. You respect people for being people. You respect their integrity, their person, and all of these kind of things, regardless of who they are. Non-dispute, avivada, I think, concord here, samagga again, is this word you see a lot in the Pali Suttas, and unity, ekibhava, being one, so to speak. Again, a bhikkhu maintains verbal acts of loving kindness, both in public and in private, towards his companions in the holy life. This too is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to all of these things: cohesion, non-dispute, concord, and unity. So you also have verbal acts of loving kindness. You say things that, remember the other day I talked about, goes to the heart and all of these kind of things. Verbal acts of loving kindness. Okay. Again, a bhikkhu maintains the mental acts of loving kindness, both in public and in private, towards his companions in the holy life. This too is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to unity. And we have just had a look at that. That previous sutta was all about how to steer the mind towards mental acts of loving kindness, to see the good in people. And that's what it really is about. The idea of metta is the ability to see the positive character traits in other people. That's where it starts out. And when you can see the positive, forgive the negative, that is what metta and compassion kind of really come together. And this gives you a lot of information about what metta as a meditation practice is about, right? This is why in meditation practice you often start off, it's said, with somebody who is dear to you, somebody you respect, somebody who is you have positive perceptions of. You start with those because that is where they are the easy ones. And this is exactly what is going on here. So that is where you have the metta first of all. That's why we often start the meditation in this way. And then, so that is how it works. I'll just read through the rest of the sutta first of all, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about metta meditation at the end of this sutta. Again, a bhikkhu uses things in common with his virtuous companions in the holy life without making reservations. He shares with them any gain of a kind that accords with the Dhamma and has been obtained in a way that accords with the Dhamma, including even the mere contents of his alms bowl. This too is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to unity. This idea of sharing things with the people who are close to you. You're always, if you are generous to people around you, then it means that you feel a sense of, you feel kind of cared for, and you kind of create unity by having that kind of generosity without making reservations, right? Without holding back. And this little phrase here was interesting. The gain that accord with the Dhamma, that are obtained in ways that accord with the Dhamma. And this is found elsewhere in the suttas as well. And this idea that if you want to give something, the things that you have worked hard for, that you have kind of paid for properly by working hard and kind of etc., those are the things that you feel really belong to you, right? This is because those things you have earned. You have earned them in a proper way. But if you have attained something by perhaps cheating a little bit or by not being quite honest or whatever, it almost feels like you're not really worthy of those things 100%. And if you give those away, it doesn't have the same kind of power of generosity because you're not really giving something which you feel is truly yours in the first place. So obtained in accordance with Dhamma means that you really have earned these things in a way that is appropriate. So as a monastic, you have been living well, you have been following your precepts, you have been practicing in the right way, and then you feel worthy of that support. And then when you share that things that you have won in the right way, then it has a much more powerful effect of generosity. So generosity varies depending on so many factors that come into the idea of generosity. But when we are generous with each other, we create that sense of unity. It's a kind of natural feeling that comes from that. And Even the contents of your alms bowl here, this is where I was talking about that the other day as well. So you share everything here. Again, a bhikkhu dwells both in public and in private, possessing in common with his companions in the holy life those virtues that are unbroken, untorn, unblotched, unmottled, liberating, commended by the wise, not misapprehended, and conducive to samadhi. This too is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to unity. So here, everybody is practicing the same kind of virtue together. And again, of course, that creates a very kind of strong sense of cohesion when everybody's trying to do what is right, practicing in the right way. And here, of course, this little paragraph here is basically the kind of virtue that you have when you become an Aryan. So now we're moving almost into the Aryan territory here, because this is what the Aryans have. They have these virtues that are unbroken, right? That are kind of continuous. They don't kind of you don't let up on your practice of virtue. You're always carrying on. It doesn't mean that as a noble one you never make any mistakes. You do, but one of the qualities of the noble ones is that you confess that fault straight away if you make a mistake. And then you have this nice little qualities here of this one, that it is liberating, right? One of those things that is so important to understand on the spiritual path, that virtue is liberating. Virtue doesn't kind of tie you down and enslave you. It may tie you down a little bit initially, but in the long run it liberates you. And the liberation, of course, is mental. You may be tied down what you can do, but mentally you feel free, because you are free of these, you're reducing the defilements in the mind, and the defilements are the things that tie us down more than anything else. By doing this, you're reducing these things that tie you down, that make your mind feel unfree, quite literally. And for this reason, these things are actually liberating. People think that doing whatever you want in the world is freedom, but it's not. It is often slavery. You are enslaved by craving. Beings are the slave of craving. It says in this beautiful sutta, the Ratapala Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 82, the 4 summaries of the Dhamma, and one of them is one of those summaries, and these were the summaries that made Ratapala go forth from household life and become a monastic. And that was when the Buddha told him that beings are the slaves of craving. Craving is leading along. You're just following along like a slave, thinking that you are free to follow your desires, but actually you have no rest, you have no peace, you are agitated, you are the opposite of being free. You are a slave, in fact. And this is the problem with these things. But whereas if you are virtuous, you give up some of that craving, that is where freedom actually arises as a consequence. Commended by the wise, right? This is what wise people say here. And of course, that is what really matters in life. Whatever is commended by the wise, that is worthwhile doing. Not misapprehended, apparamatang, and or something like that. I can't even pronounce that word properly, I think. But it doesn't actually mean not misapprehended. What it means is not grasped, ungrasped, what it means. And the idea here is that when you practice well and you get to a certain stage of insight, these things become part of your character, they're part of who you are. You cannot avoid being virtuous anymore. And that's why they are ungrasped, because it's natural. Most people, they have to hold on a little bit to their virtue. They have to remind themselves, don't do that. Okay, I'm not going to do it. Whereas for the Aryans, it is just a natural expression of who they are. And that is why it is ungrasped. If you look at the 3 fetters, right? If you look at the one of the ways that the Buddhist teaching about how we are bound to samsara, how that is taught, is in terms of what they call the fetters, sangyojana. Fetters are the things that bind us to existence. And these sangyojanas, they are kind of, these fetters are given up according to a certain sequence. So when you become a stream mentor, you give up 3 fetters. And one of those fetters that they give up is precisely the holding on, sila batta paramasa, which means grasping virtue and vows, or grasping virtue and behavior. So you don't actually have to hold on to things anymore. Prior to being a stream mentor, you have to hold on to these things a little bit, to your virtue, to whatever. After that, you don't have to hold on. It is natural. So this is ungrasped. And then lastly, conducive to stillness, conducive to samadhi. Again, right? Again and again, you see these things in the suttas, that direct connection between sila on the one hand and samadhi on the other hand. It's everywhere, absolutely everywhere here. And that is really the only connection there is in the suttas. What is really supportive for samadhi? It's always the same thing. Sila is the one that matters. So when these, and of course what this tells you is that that virtue has to be consistent, right? The more consistent it is, the more committed you are to it, the more you persevere in this. This is the meaning of unbroken, untorn, all of that. The more you do that, the more consistent you are, and the longer period of time you keep on doing it. So you are diluting that salty water, right? As the water becoming less and less salty, the simile of the grain of salt. You're kind of building up a large quantity of water, and the salt then gets diluted, and then over time it becomes more and more conducive to samadhi as a consequence. So of course that is what we're trying to go with our meditation practice. And then we have the last one here. Again, a bhikkhu dwells both in public and in private, possessing in common with his companions in the holy life that view that is noble and emancipating, or if you like, liberating, and leads one who practices in accordance with it to the complete destruction, or the complete ending of suffering here. This too is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. And this is this view that you have when you become a stream enterer, right? You become a stream enterer, and then everyone, so when you have this view in common with your fellow monastics, it becomes very powerful because everybody's kind of heading in the same direction. Everybody has a common understanding of things. And a common understanding of things is very useful if you want to have harmony. So very often what you find in, for example, in a monastery or any kind of maybe Buddhist society or whatever, maybe you have one lead kind of teacher, a bit like Ajahn Brahm perhaps, and then people tend to ordain under him because they agree with what he says. You have faith in Ajahn Brahm's practice and what he does, so you ordain there. And after a while, everybody has a similar kind of view. And then that is one way that you tend to have harmony within a society and within a group of people, because people kind of have a similar kind of lookout. And the highest kind of lookout is then the lookout of stream entry, where everyone has that understanding of the Dhamma, pulling in the same direction, heading in the same direction, really. So it is like, sometimes, of course, it's good to have our views challenged a little bit. If we are never challenged, then often we don't grow, and we can't really correct our faults and these kind of things. So it's a balance between living with people who have roughly the same views on the one hand, and then also having challenges a little bit on the other hand. Those two things kind of have to be nicely balanced. So enough challenges to kind of keep you a little bit on your toes, but not so many that you are completely confused and live in disharmony. So that is the last one of these 6 principles of cordiality. And then when you kind of have done all of this, and especially when you have practiced the loving kindness by body and speech, and also in thought, right? Also thought here is of course very important. Of course, when your thoughts are starting to turn towards loving kindness, that is when the possibility of loving kindness meditation really starts to become, it becomes possible to do that. So your mind is already heading in that direction here. And this tells you again a lot about how the loving kindness meditation actually works. You already have to have a starting off with a positive viewpoint of that object of meditation. So you start off with somebody who you feel is worthy of that loving kindness, worthy of your well-wishing, somebody you respect. And then that loving kindness meditation takes off on that basis. I should have included here the standard expression for how loving kindness is expressed in the suttas. But basically it is something to the effect that you pervade one direction with a mind of loving kindness, the second, the third, the fourth, up and down, across and everywhere, to all directions. And then an interesting phrase in there, it says to all as to oneself. Sabbatataya is the Pali word. And what is interesting about that is that it is probably wrong. That is the most interesting part about that one. And it's interesting because a lot of the way that loving kindness meditation is taught, we were talking about that this the other day as well in the Q&A, it is taught you start off with yourself and then you radiate it out to the whole world. And that is from the Visuddhimagga. Visuddhimagga is a work in the Pali tradition that was written by a monk called Buddhaghosa almost 1,000 years after the Buddha. And that is where that really comes from, that idea. And it seems to be based on this idea in this little passage about how to do metta, which people have read as to all, as to oneself. And a very interesting study done by a monk recently who shows that probably is a misreading here. And I checked that with Ajahn Sujato as well, and it's a very powerful study. He certainly agreed with the conclusions there. It seems to be right. And actually that word actually just means everywhere. It means to the whole world. There's no kind of atta, self in there at all. Sab-attataya, atta, the atta part in there usually means oneself. But actually it seems to be a misunderstanding of what is going on. So that whole idea of meditating and focusing on oneself, or starting with that, the whole thing about that seems to be a little bit dubious and unreliable, which is very interesting. It turns upside down a lot of the way that this metta meditation is often is done. And so in the suttas, instead of even focusing on individuals at all, in the suttas it is often just you do it to one direction. Yeah, so you do it to the northern direction, to the eastern direction, or whatever it is. And of course, the good thing, the nice thing about that is that if we think about individuals, even if it is ourselves, it is very easy sometimes to see the faults in an individual person. You see the good sides, the faults are often very, very close by, and it can be difficult to maintain that kind of purity there in the mind. But if you just do it to a certain direction and you remind yourself of all the good people who are out there, all the good beings, you remember all those qualities and you build up those qualities in your mind. Perhaps you see somebody without a name, somebody you don't know, but you still see them with a kind of peaceful smile on their face, going about their ordinary activities in a beautiful and kind-hearted way. And you see all those beings in one direction, and then you wish them well. It means you can build up a picture that is very pure, that lacks all of those negative qualities. That is one of the advantages of doing metta to the directions rather than doing it to individuals. But again, it's not as if there is any right or wrong way of doing these things. It is always about whatever works. And if it works for you to do it towards an individual, for example, that is fine as well, and you can kind of bring people into that circle, more and more people, as you go along. The most important thing is that you start off with somebody who has, you have a feeling of all these good qualities, whether it's the direction, the individual, or whatever it is. You already have that pure vision, pure perception in your mind of good qualities. That is the most important thing here. So there's no real magic to this. It's just a matter of, of overcoming the defilements to some extent before you do this. In the suttas, the real metta happens after samadhi. And this is one of the reasons why it is so hard before you have attained any deep meditation, because there tends to be some underlying defilements that block your ability to do this. But after you've attained samadhi, after you've been watching the breath and you're becoming quite peaceful, it is often easier to do this kind of thing. So that is just a few hints on how to do the metta meditation. Maybe we can try to do some metta meditation tonight or something. It is not easy, so don't be disappointed if you can't give rise to any positive feelings. It actually is very rare for people to be able to do that. If you can, it's wonderful, and if you can't, don't be disappointed about that. Sometimes just learning how to kind of point your mind in the right direction, point it towards the good qualities in others. Often that already is a valuable lesson in its own right. Okay, so now let us move on to the next sutta. And this sutta, very famous sutta called the Simile of the Soul, the Kakachupama Sutta. And you've probably heard the Simile of the Soul before. And this particular sutta, it shows us a little bit more about how to practice metta and also the results of metta practice, what it actually does to our mind once that metta becomes very powerful and strong. And there are some remarkable results from metta practice. So this is Majjhima Nikaya number 21, the middle-length sayings of the Buddha. And this is how it goes. So I'm just going to skip the first 3 lines, and then when the Buddha says to the monks, when others address you, their speech may be timely or untimely. When others address you, their speech may be true or untrue. When others address you, their speech may be gentle or harsh. When others address you, their speech may be connected with good or with harm. When others address you, their speech may be spoken with a mind of loving kindness and with inner hate. So these are 5 kind of ways in which speech may happen, and of course we should always try to speak on the positive side of those 5 ways. So we should try to speak timely rather than untimely. And this is a very important aspect in right speech, to know the right time to speak, when people are ready, when people are open, not just when your defilements are kind of compelling you to speak. I must speak now, and you kind of blurt it out or something, but you wait till the time is roughly right. That actually takes a lot of discipline, a lot of wisdom to be able to do that, right? It's actually quite hard to talk the right thing at the right time always. True and untrue, I think that's fairly obvious that we should speak the truth. That is not so hard to understand. Actually, there was a question yesterday, about what was that again? That was a lawyer, right? A lawyer who was uncertain about whether going to court. So when you go to court, should you protect your client? Should you just kind of blurt out everything your client has done, or should you kind of be careful? And it occurred to me afterwards that I think the problem there is really what is expected of you as a lawyer, yeah? And in a court situation, perhaps, I don't know, but perhaps what is probably not expected. It's probably not your job to tell everything about your client. That is probably the prosecution's job. The prosecution should kind of ferret out all the information, and your job is to be not dishonest, but to kind of give the positive spin on things. Perhaps, yeah? And that is, I think, so if that is what is expected in a court situation, then of course it is fine. You're not really going beyond the bounds of what is reasonable. But if you lie outright and you say something which is untrue, that will be a very different situation. It just occurred to me afterwards that it probably isn't expected that you should kind of put your client in a difficult situation by saying everything about them, right? So I think there's a bit of leeway there. But of course, only you probably know much far better than I do how the legal system works, but that is certainly one thing you can take into account. Anyway, so true and untrue, gentle and harsh, right? Fairly obvious again. Connected with good and connected with harm. So you say things that are connected with other people's benefit, not with their harm. Now, of course, what is interesting there again is that it doesn't mean that the other person necessarily should like what you say. You don't have to say things that the other person likes. If you are gentle and you are saying something which is connected with their good, it's okay to say things that they may not like, right? They may not enjoy hearing it. Sometimes you have to hear the truth, and then the truth may not be nice, but in the long run, it may actually be of benefit to you. And there's that nice simile in the sutta somewhere where the Buddha says, well, if he's speaking to this prince, and he says to this prince, well, if your little son, baby son or daughter or whatever it is, swallows a pebble and choking on the pebble, what would you do? Would you kind of stick your finger into the throat and kind of pull it out, even if it draws blood? And of course he would do that because you want to save the child from dying. So of course you would then do short-term harm for long-term good. And exactly the same thing when you teach the Dhamma sometimes. You have to be blunt. You have to say things the way they are. Okay, so the person doesn't like it, but in the long run it will be beneficial. Keep the 5 precepts. No, I don't want to keep the 5 precepts. Oh, I want to kind of mess around and enjoy myself and do bad things. Nobody's going to bring you happiness. Oh, I don't want to hear what you say. Okay, I'll try it out, see what happens. That kind of thing, right? So something like that. Then we have with a mind of loving kindness rather than with a mind of hate is the last one. So most of those are fairly obvious what is going on. And of course, other people may not have the same high standards as certain Buddhists, but regardless of that, we all the time, we hear things all the time that are not nice. This is just the way of the world. Things people speak, and people often speak hurriedly, too fast, and they speak all kind of silly, stupid things. And the question then is really here, how should we react when we hear this kind of speech? And it may have all of the wrong qualities, right? And still, regardless of those qualities, this is what the Buddha says, how we should react. Here in bhikkhus, you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected. We shall utter no bad words. We shall abide compassionate for their welfare, with a mind of loving kindness without inner hate. Yeah, so you should not allow yourself to be affected by speech, by other people's speech, regardless of what they say. And the speech is one of the things that can be the most upsetting in life. So this is a very strong admonition here by the Buddha for us to have that evenness of mind, regardless of what comes into our ears and how the negative things, etc. We shall abide pervading that person, that very person, with a mind imbued with loving kindness, and starting with that person, we shall abide providing the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train bhikkhus. Yeah, so very interesting here. And this is very kind of different from what we perhaps normally hear. And this is one of the things that makes this sutta so interesting. We should start off your loving kindness with that person who you find difficult perhaps, who says things that are not very nice. You start there. And why is that? This is almost opposite of what I said before. You start with the person that is easy, right? Here we start with perhaps the person that is most difficult. And the idea here is that the background, of course, is that we are already at ease pretty much with the whole world. We're already forgiven, done all of those things. We already practice in the right way. We already have a sense of metta pretty much to everyone and compassionate. And then comes the Ajahn mosquito, right? Who kind of gives you a hard time and kind of tries to kind of press your buttons or whatever. Doesn't even try probably, just kind of does it by default. And then, of course, instead of then allowing us to lose that metta that we already have, we start with that person and ensure that we don't allow our minds to be disturbed by one person who comes, who does these kind of things. So we're already at ease, and then we make sure we neutralize this person first of all, so we don't allow ourselves to become upset. And this is why I think it is said in this particular way here. So, and then of course, once that person kind of gets neutralized, we have metta or compassion, whatever it is for them, then we can go back to the having metta for the entire world, as it says here, starting with that person. And then there is, once that person is neutralized, then we can have this boundless, the immeasurable, right? This is the idea of having no bounds, having no limits. There is nobody excluded from this. The metta just goes out into all directions. And this is what they call boundless metta, because there's nothing and nobody that is excluded from that. Abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Abundant, right? Very strong, very thoroughly practiced. Exalted, because it is a lofty state of mind where you feel lifted up, you feel a strong sense of uplift, light, energetic, buoyant, all of these things. Immeasurable, just going out and out and out without any kind of bounds, any kind of limits. Appamana. Appamana literally means without measure, without kind of limits. And that is how you should train yourself. And when you do that, what happens is the mind becomes a bit like these similes that are come up next here. And these are the similes for the person who practices in this way here. Because suppose a man came with a hoe and a basket and said, I shall make this great earth to be without earth. He would dig here and there, strew the soil here and there, spit here and there, and urinate here and there, saying, "Be without earth, be without earth." What do you think, bhikkhus? Could that man make this great earth to be without earth? No, Venerable Sir. Why is that? Because this great earth is deep. Actually, profound is almost the word, profound and deep, and immeasurable. It is not easy to make it be without earth. Eventually the man would reap only weariness and disappointment. It is not easy to make it be without earth. I like this understatement here. It's kind of the British gentlemanly attitude. And it's a nice simile because it tells you a little bit about this idea of immeasurable. The Buddha says elsewhere in the sutras the idea that you're supposed to be like the great earth, right? It means that you have developed your mind in this immeasurable way. Your mind is like it's vast. And then if somebody comes along and starts kind of digging into your mind on a tiny little spot, they kind of urinate on you. It's kind of almost like the simile here. It's like kind of saying something bad and unpleasant. And because your mind is so vast, there's this tiny little mosquitoes kind of biting you in one tiny corner far away, and it doesn't really affect you because your mind is so developed. This is kind of the simile here, and it doesn't really. You cannot really. There's nothing to be. Nothing anyone can do with you anymore because of that development of the mind. And of course, if people then deliberately try to annoy you or whatever, then of course eventually they reap only weariness and disappointment. Very often people, if they get upset or angry, they want to see a reaction, right? And if they don't see a reaction quickly, eventually they will give up because there's no point in kind of being annoyed with somebody or angry with somebody who doesn't react. If you just kind of shrug your shoulders, oh yeah, whatever, and then after a while they kind of just, they forget about it, and there's no kind of point in being angry with you anymore. Anger is kind of there you think you're going to solve something, but if you don't solve anything, you don't get into an argument, nothing really happens. Very often it just peters out and there's no problem there. It's a great way of countering anger is just to be completely equanimous about it. So, that is the first simile. The next simile is as follows. Because suppose a man came with crimson, turmeric, indigo, and carmine. Those are all colors, various kind of colors. And said, I shall draw pictures and make pictures appear on empty space. What do you think, bhikkhus? Could that man draw pictures and make pictures appear on empty space? No, Venerable Sir. Why is that? Because empty space is formless and invisible. Invisible is a better translation than non-manifestive. It is not easy to draw pictures there and make pictures appear on empty space. Eventually the man would reap only weariness and disappointment. I like this kind of absurd simile. A man comes along, he's going, I'm going to draw a picture on empty space. And so what is the point here? And what is kind of the purpose of this? And I think the purpose here is that if you have developed a lot of loving kindness and metta and compassion, a lot of your personality characteristics, they kind of fade away here. Because a lot of what we are as people is often very tied up with defilements of various kinds. But as you develop loving kindness, that is what you identify with. All you have inside of you is loving kindness. There is nothing really there to attack you anymore. The more loving kindness we have, the less we define ourselves in terms of all of these superficial things in the world. Superficial things of your background, your family, your nationality, your gender, your education, whether you're wealthy or poor, whether you're intelligent or not so intelligent, whether you are this tall or short or fat or thin or whatever it is. All of these things kind of fade away, and all that is left is the fact is loving kindness, and there's nothing really to attack there anymore. So if somebody says something, there's like you're empty inside, you're empty apart from that loving kindness, because that is what you identify with. Remember, when you go to the Brahmaloka is the genderless realm. Not only is it genderless, but it really, all of these differences that we find in the human realm, all this kind of superficial differences, all of that is really gone. There you are just a blob of metta, right? You're a bit like these teddy bears, perhaps. I'm not sure. Actually, you're formless, so there's not even like a teddy bear. You just have you're this metta, blob of metta, and that's all it is. And there is no really identification apart from that. And that is great, because it breaks down so many of the kind of stupid barriers that we create for ourselves as human beings. We compare ourselves on these very silly grounds, and then we make comparison and we think, oh, I am better than they are really stupid, or whatever it is. And then kind of that is what creates so much problems in this world, this identity. Religious identity being one of those. Religious identity being a massive cause for problem, of course. So we go beyond that as well. In the Brahma Loka, maybe you find some Brahmas of, actually that whole identity stuff goes away when you get to that point. So that, I think, is the meaning of this. We become empty inside, empty apart from that metta, that powerful loving kindness that encompasses everyone without boundaries, without discriminating at all. So again, the person reaps weariness and disappointment because of the metta in that person. And the next simile, because suppose a man came with a blazing grass torch and said, I shall heat up and burn away the river Ganges with this blazing grass torch. What do you think, bhikkhus? Could that man heat up and burn away the river Ganges with that blazing grass torch? No, Venerable Sir. Why is that? Because the river Ganges is deep and immense. It is not easy to heat it up and burn it away with a blazing grass torch. Eventually that man would reap only weariness and disappointment. So you are cool inside. You are metta, but you're also cool at the same time. You're not hot with defilements. And that coolness is like this massive amount of coolness, like the river Ganges. And if somebody comes with a tiny little match, right, and kind of tries to set fire on you, it's just impossible because of that large amount of water. And the river Ganges really is a massive river. When you traverse the river Ganges, then it's almost like, I think, a couple of kilometers wide at least in certain spots. It really just goes on forever when you go over it. So again, this idea that you are cool, right? There is no way of kind of annoying you or getting a reaction out of you. So again, you reap only weariness and disappointment as a consequence. Okay, I'm going to skip the next simile because I don't really understand it fully. So I go to the last one. Catskin bag, yeah, that's kind of slightly strange. So I'm not sure what that is. So if somebody else wants to talk about that, they can. But this is the last one. The last one is the famous one. The name of the sutta comes from this last simile, and this is how it goes. Because even if bandits were to sever you savagely limb by limb with a two-handled saw, he who gave rise to a mind of hate towards them would not be carrying out my teaching. Herein, bhikkhus, you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected. We shall utter no evil words. We shall abide compassionate to their welfare with a mind of loving kindness without inner hate. We shall abide pervading them, that particular person, with a mind imbued with loving kindness. And starting with them, we shall abide pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, without ill will. That is how you should train, bhikkhus. And this is the most powerful one, right? The idea of some bandits coming along, taking out a big saw, pinning you down to the ground, and then sawing off your limbs one by one. What would your reaction be if that happened? Would you say, "Oh yeah, no worries," keep on? How would you wouldn't feel? It's difficult to imagine lying there and just having metta towards these people. It's quite hard, right? Usually, you would get just a little bit upset if that happened. And this shows you, and this is what is wonderful about this, is that it shows you the potential for the development of the mind. It is enormous potential. And this is kind of what is so interesting about this. This is not to intimidate you, to feel that the Buddhist teachings, oh, it's impossible, I can't live up to this. That is the wrong way of thinking about this. It's more like, wow, can that be done? What an amazing thing that this is possible, to even live like this. Somebody can actually, this kind of savage kind of attack on you, even then you can have a mind of loving kindness. And of course, if you can have a mind of loving kindness in that kind of situation, there is no situation in which you cannot have loving kindness and compassion for other people. So how can this be done? And the answer is, you already know the answer, because we've been talking about that this morning. You know, it's about understanding that people who do this kind of thing, they are just completely deluded. They have no idea what they're doing. If you are a good person and you are living well, and you would be if you have that kind of metta, they are creating enormous amounts of bad karma. And you reflect on that. You remember that these people are completely lost it. They are crazy in a certain way. And when you remember that, you look at their suffering rather than looking at your own suffering, it is still possible to have compassion and metta in that kind of situation. Yeah, if somebody really saws you apart limb by limb, it won't be long before you're dead, right? And then when you're dead, if your heart is full of metta, bang, straight off to Brahmaloka. No big problem, right? You can just, okay, go ahead, saw me apart, okay, no worries, I'll be fine. But the person who does that, they instead, what they have in front of them is enormous amount of suffering in the future for doing an act which is absolutely terrible and a kind of really serious assault on somebody else. So you can see what's going on there. You have that, there is a completely different way of thinking about things. Instead of being self-centered, you instead focus on the other person, and then you're able to deal with even these very, very difficult and painful feelings. Of course, it helps here to be, the more developed you are in wisdom as well, it helps enormously, because when you are wise, you understand that the body not really you, so you have much more distance to these feelings. The feelings don't feel like you in quite the same way. So you can still feel the pain, but it's more like at a distance. And that makes, of course, a big difference. But still, we can move towards these kind of perceptions in a certain way. So then the Buddha says, Bhikkhus, if you keep this advice on the simile of the saw constantly in mind, do you see any course of speech, trivial or gross, that you could not endure? No, Venerable Sir. And therefore, Bhikkhus, you should keep this advice on the simile of the saw constantly in mind. That will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. So the idea here is to kind of keep it at the back of your mind, not kind of at the front of your mind all the time. That would be impossible, but keep it at the back of your mind at all times, so that you know, you kind of remember what is going on here. That is what the Blessed One said. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So there you are, a very high standard there that the Buddha sets for his monks. And it is something that we all should aspire for, I think, at least to some extent, to move in that direction. And then it will be, as it says here, it will be for your benefit and welfare and happiness for a long time, if you're able to practice in this way and think at least a little bit like this, at least heading in that direction here. So there you are. That is a little bit about metta today, and a continuation of what we did this morning. And of course, all this is a very important part of the Buddhist path. So that is all for now, and we'll see you again at 7:30 this evening here.